And when Julia returns, I'm going to have her log into the meeting and she can admit folks and go ahead and mute hot mics. We're going to go ahead and get started. We have the chat rolling. If you're in the room, you see the chat. If you are virtual, you can see the chat, but just know that you are just know that your chat messages are visible in the room to participants here. So just be mindful of your comms. And the other thing is be mindful of the fact that this meeting is being recorded. So if you don't want to be recorded, then definitely don't come on camera and don't participate in the chat. You can hold your questions and email me post-event with any questions that you might have. So all that said, thank you for that. We'll go ahead and kick off. So welcome. Thank you. This is like very like hello over there. This is very, wasn't planning on that. Good morning. I'm Megan. I have an intro slide, but I'll just like roll into it. I'm Megan Maley. I am the compliance technical specialist supporting the Department of Defense and Microsoft Federal. What does that mean? That means that I'm a technical pre-sales resource in the lane of data security and data governance for Microsoft Purview on the M365 side. Hello, good morning.
Morning. I've got some more crew here.
Wonderful.
You're in the wrong room.
There's a lot going on here. This is my first time at the MTC, so I was even a little bit taken back by how much there is going on. Julia, would you do me a grand favor when you get situated and log in to the meeting, and then what was I going to ask you to do? Oh, accept participants as they join.
Yes.
That are in the lobby. Thank you. Sorry to call you out. So we're kind of slow getting started this morning because the MTC is in Arlington and a lot of people have to metro in, find parking, all that good stuff. But we'll get rolling here. So I was in the middle of introducing myself, I think. I have an introductory slide, so I won't spend too much time on that. But basically, here we are. I want to quickly call out hospitality has been very graciously provided by our friends at AvePoint this morning for breakfast and coffee. And then lunch is provided by Epiq. Where's Dan? Dan is here from Epiq, and he'll be speaking about all the great integrations for M365 here shortly. So facility logistics. I have a COOT background, so we're going to go through logistics for the facility. Restrooms are, if you go out of here, this floor is a circle as well as the 13th floor. So if you follow the signs around, you're going to run into a restroom. But in particular, the men's is that way, and the female is if you go out of here and go this way, you kind of go around the loop, and the restrooms are there. Egress, obviously, go that way down the hall, and you're going to run into the elevators, which you don't want to use in the event of a fire, right? You want to find the stairs, which I didn't actually find out where those are prior to coming here, so shame on me. Refreshments, I think that you have found 13th floor and 14th floor, and then there's also a little kitchenette out here. Help yourself to whatever's available there. I do have scheduled breaks. I have a break scheduled this morning. We have a lunch break at 11:45, and then there's an afternoon break scheduled. And then, as I mentioned, you are being recorded. So if you're not comfortable with that, then definitely don't engage. The other thing is that the recording will be made available publicly. And so from that respect, be mindful of anything that is sensitive. Definitely don't share anything from a question perspective that is very specific to your customer environment or your tenant environment that would be considered sensitive or CUI. So this is me. I am from about 100 miles north of St. Louis, a place called Hannibal, Missouri, Quincy, Illinois, that neck of the woods. Nobody knows where that is. It's like rural farming community. I moved to Northern Virginia in 2012, went to work immediately as a defense contractor supporting, at the time it was ITA, now it's JSP, as basically glorified help desk, but quickly transitioned over into the cyber side. So I've been doing cyber about 10 years as a defense contractor. And now, as I mentioned, my specialty is data security and data governance, specifically with regard to what we're going to find in the Microsoft Purview compliance portal. So Microsoft Purview, and this will come up a few times today, so it's worth mentioning. Microsoft Purview, Microsoft rebranded what was formerly the compliance portal and what was also formerly Azure Purview. We rebranded this into the single umbrella focused on data security, data governance. But it's a little bit confusing because there's an M365 side and an Azure side. Sometime in the fall, we think it's going to be a unified portal where there will be a single pane of glass to be able to manage your entire data estate through one login, one portal. That time is not yet, but we're hoping very soon. But for the meantime, when we say Microsoft Purview, it's very confusing. We really mean we have to clarify M365 or Azure from an asset perspective. So anyway, that's my wheelhouse. You can find me on LinkedIn. It's very easy to find me. Just search my name. Hey, good morning. And then my email is there. Please feel free to follow up. Specifically, I support the Department of Defense. However, this event is with the purpose of being defense and federal. So the topics that we'll walk through today, for the most part, are going to be federal and defense, with the exception of we do have someone from DoD specifically. So obviously that won't apply to federal. All right, so why are we here? I am asked lots by customers, who are your adopters of M365 records management? Who is actually using M365 for native records management? That's something I'd love to be able to share with everyone. Unfortunately, I'm not in a position to be sharing oh, Army's doing this and here's your POCs, reach out to them. That's just not my lane, right? I'm here as a support resource and not necessarily someone that can point you to all the technical POCs that I know you'd love to share information with. So we have said for a long time, we should really get all these customers together, all the folks that are doing records management in our federal agencies and our DoD components. We should get everyone together and have kind of a meeting of the minds and be able to share knowledge. Is something being presented? Yes. Can we not see it? Can anyone else virtually not see a presentation? Yeah, so Tim, I would recommend dropping and rejoining. So the goal here is to come together, connect, network. I encourage you, drop your LinkedIn profile in the chat if you're comfortable doing it, and then connect with other people that put their LinkedIn profile in the chat. Connect, network, learn who your peers are in other organizations so that we can share information going forward. We're also here to discuss what are your resources from a policy perspective. We have someone here to discuss from a NARA perspective and what the kind of goals for 2023 for NARA are, as well as from the DoD CIO office with specific regard to records management, but then also the new records management strategy and just specifically our resources as they align to a common goal. And then also from a Microsoft perspective, who are your resources on our side that you can lean out to? We want to enable success, not just for today, but going forward. We want to make sure that if you choose to leverage M365 resources or Azure resources for your records management journey, that you know where to go. Training wise, all that stuff, tech documentation, and then also we want to empower you for the future. So with that said, I'm considering turning this event into not a full day event, but a kind of a working webinar going forward on a monthly basis. If anybody is interested in doing that, just let me know, holler in the chat if you'd be interested or talk to me in person here today. But just kind of a reason to get together on a month-to-month basis and share from a technology perspective, what's on the roadmap, maybe short demos of new features that are available, address questions, have partners share, etc. Thank you. If you're sharing your LinkedIn in the chat, thank you very much for doing that. This is a event agenda, and then I'm gonna kick it over to Dan. But as you see, we have a full day. The first session will be an overview leveraging Microsoft Purview for records management. And then we have Lisa from NARA, who's going to talk about our priorities for 2023. We have Mark Patrick from the DoD CIO office. Lunch, as I mentioned, for on-site participants is going to be provided by Epiq. Thank you very much for doing that, Dan and the Epiq team. Right after lunch, 12:30 Eastern, we're going to have a demo of our Navy tenant records management instantiation, which is really cool. The work that they have done at the Navy is pretty important. I'm excited about that. We're going to have at 1:15 Eastern M365 records management function. So get down a little bit more granular in the tool. And then at that point, there'll be a breakout session, 2 breakouts essentially. The first one, records management beyond M365. So this is going to touch on our Azure side, Azure data governance. It's going to touch on third-party data connectors, et cetera. And then the other side will be basically pivoting your data governance journey into an information security journey. And that will be Dan, and that will be, so the folks that choose the information protection path will stay in this room. And then the other folks will go over to another room that I'll let you know at that time. And for online participants who want to join the session with Mike and Annika regarding records management beyond M365, I'll share that URL in the chat. And then after that, we'll have a Q&A panel with basically anyone that is considered a SME in the area that is still here. I know Mark will still be here. Mike, we'll have someone from AvePoint, Antoine, that will be able to speak to records management, as well as Matt Studley, who is a global black belt, and really anyone else that wants to chime in. It is meant to be very conversational and in the intent of sharing information. So with that said, I'd like to welcome Dan Elam. He is our a valued partner. Epiq is a valued partner, and he is the Information Governance Director, and we'll pass this off.
A little awkward pass off here. So how many people have been to this facility before? I know those of you that are remote can't see it and stuff, but any of you been to this facility before? So, well, one of the trivia things is that, so from the government perspective, we've been doing, what records management now about 7,000 years. Okay. So, some of the first things that came up were complaints about vendor performance and stuff. So this is something that is not new. What is kind of neat as a piece of trivia, though, is if you take a look at, all the technology that we've developed and all the, the things we've done for the internet, the idea that we would end up with less information, sort of the early hallmark for records management, that didn't happen, did it? So we ended up with just an explosion of information. We've become sort of a nation of digital pack rats. And for me, the trivia is, if you look right behind you at that white building, that is where the internet started. So that was the DARPA ARPANET facility, so where they did the original pieces that became the internet. So we can blame them or we can thank them and stuff like that. But just as a little piece of trivia, it was interesting that Microsoft chooses to do this event right here. So just so you understand where I'm going to come from, so my background, I've been working with Microsoft for more years than I care to confess and stuff. So back when Microsoft originally bought SharePoint, I've been a frequent critic of some of the things that Microsoft has done. In the last couple years, Microsoft has really gotten their act together on some things, and I'm going to talk about how these things have come together and stuff. But I work for Epiq. I'm a director for the information governance team, and we come sort of from that legal and compliance world. So when there are lawsuits or big FOIA issues and things like that, most of the attorneys in the world know who we are. So we have more attorneys, unfortunately, than most law firms and stuff. So for us, it's a very practical thing when we talk about compliance. What are the regulatory risks? What are the issues that you have in terms of what it's going to cost you to do? We also have a group that focuses on breach pieces. So we look at it in sort of pragmatic dollar terms, like what can we do to comply? What is it that we have to comply with? And what are the things that we can sort of slide with, and what are the cost implications? So when I talk about things, it's kind of coming from that big picture. The other thing is that we actually do this work for Microsoft, and along the way, we've helped Microsoft on the compliance products in various pieces. And today, we're Microsoft's largest partner for the information protection and governance stack. Now, for those of you that are maybe federal integrators, so we do not sell direct to federal agencies. We work exclusively through partners. So we're not a competitor for anybody that might be on here. Okay, so let's talk about how Microsoft's gotten here, because it's important not just for records management, but how records management informs lots of other things when it comes to information. So Microsoft started, how many of you had early SharePoint implementations? So kind of like file shares on steroids, you know, it's like we took a bad problem and made it worse and stuff like that. So, you know, the early SharePoint implementations were a real pain from a records perspective and stuff, because people just dumped stuff in there. Now we had some metadata that may or not work. So we also had things like, you know, we might ask records to declare, users to declare records, right? We'd have the drop down box and stuff. So how'd that work out? Not real well. So, and the IT groups, by the way, they were the worst. So we did audits and found in some cases, you know, 60% of the records would be the first thing in the drop down box, because that's just what people could do to be able to get through it and stuff like that. So Microsoft sort of learned from that people were inherently not good about having to do work and stuff like that. So admin work and stuff. So the other thing is that there was going to be a lot of information. So Microsoft sort of broke it into two pieces. We've got all of the risk and compliance things we have to do, including records management and stuff. But we also need to be able to see the data and put these things together and stuff. And so what Microsoft came up with is we've got a suite of products on your M365 G5 GCC high licenses that include the modules to be able to manage the information. And then they have a set of products on the data governance side, which is how we find the information, particularly structured information, because of course, records management and compliance isn't just about unstructured information. And how do you bring this together? And Megan mentioned this. So one of the problems that we have is that the Microsoft marketing team is not always in sync with, you know, the rest of the world and stuff like that. So they had a product called Purview, which ran on Azure to do the data governance. And they said, that's a great name. So we're going to adopt that, and we're going to use that for everything and stuff. But people get confused because they've got the M365 licenses, which don't include that. They're two different things, two different ways that they work together and stuff like that. And to make it even more confusing for some of us, now Microsoft has other things that are sort of part of information protection and governance that are not part of an M365 license. They're not part of Azure. You buy them on top of other things and stuff. So think of Purview as a branding name and stuff for these things. So I'm going to focus on understanding sort of the differences and how they come together, because it really is a compelling story. And as Microsoft gets closer to that true single pane of glass, we're going to see some pretty compelling advantages. So the first thing that we want to come away with today is that Microsoft has an infrastructure technology called Microsoft Information Protection. So everybody here familiar with sort of retention labels for records, right? Microsoft said that works great. So they extended it to sensitive information with an information protection tag. So basically it's a tag that you can put with documents or Teams chats or email and stuff like that that allows you to define sensitive information. And here's the thing. Then that tag gets related to the content of the information. It lives with the life cycle. It's used as an infrastructure. So while Microsoft came up with this, it's not just Microsoft. Now you've got Google and Salesforce and Box and Oracle all support this underlying technology. So it becomes a new way to add additional classification information, add information around how we're going to protect things. And by the way, it works all the way from your Android or iOS cell phone, all the way up to anything you might have for third party in the cloud, and everything for Microsoft in the middle. So it truly is a cross-industry piece that Microsoft said, once we get this, now we can start changing the game for what we do on the compliance side. Now, at a high level, there's sort of four big kind of components of things that we deal with in the technology world. So I've got, you know, Exchange, where Microsoft has 88% market share. I've got, of course, the Office applications, which is over 90% and stuff. I've got collaboration. I think SharePoint's up to now 89% of organizations use SharePoint. Maybe not exclusively, but they still have, you know, SharePoint installed. Of course, Teams is the fastest growing technology in the history of mankind. It beat the Xbox and the iPhone for how fast it got adopted and stuff. So Microsoft is sort of, you know, at a critical mass on some of those things. And then on the security side, we have things that every agency needs to do in terms of, managing our devices, figuring out, identity, how you get in, how we just manage being able to get in through cloud applications and stuff. And then we've got all of the compliance pieces in the world. Well, if you take a look at these 4 stacks where Microsoft has a pretty decent footprint and stuff, what Microsoft said is, okay, we've got these 4 things, but Microsoft is sort of uniquely positioned to be able to be in the center of this and stuff. And while not necessarily controlling all the standards, at least they can be a big influence because of the things that Microsoft, has developed for infrastructure. So many of you remember the content management systems. You may have had a FileNet or OpenText or Trim or something like that. So the interesting thing about that market is normally in the software market, after like 5 or 6 years, the market collapses down to 2 or 3 vendors. One vendor is the winner, and then everybody else is, kind of, maybe there's a strong second just as an alternative, and then everybody else, for the most part, ends up sort of being a has-been and stuff like that. That didn't happen when it came to managing content. For 25 years, we still had over 200 software OEMs, all with different standards and everything else. And what that meant is that we couldn't get to this sort of single pane of glass. We couldn't find things. We couldn't consistently apply policies across all that information. And Microsoft said, particularly with their experience with SharePoint, we can help set those standards and stuff. And so the things that Microsoft has done have been a 10-year journey as Microsoft's learned from what they've done for how they put these pieces together. And if you take a look at the market for why this has become important to do now, there are 3 key drivers. First of all, there's cloud migration. So everybody's moving to the cloud. It is impossible for an agency or commercial company for that matter to be nearly as cost effective for the price performance and the features that you get than what the large cloud providers can do. And this isn't limited to Microsoft. So Google and Amazon also have competitive advantages in their places and stuff like that. So the point is there's been a rush to the cloud. Well, that rush to the cloud, because it gives us operational savings and maybe enhanced functionality, also means it's harder for compliance. Now we've got to deal with records management in the cloud. Now I've got to deal with, how do I deal with a FOIA request for things that are maintained by, a contractor or somebody like that. We also have the data privacy issues. And so certainly data privacy is one of these, fundamental, human rights and stuff. No question about that. But I can't also ignore the fact that there's a little bit of a populist politician thing where it's easy for politicians to say, bad, particularly corporations, bad government for not protecting information and stuff like that. It's one of those rah-rah things that you can use to sort of get votes and stuff like that. And it's great because you don't have to spend any money. In fact, just the opposite. You take a look at GDPR. GDPR within the first 9 weeks of being on the books generated $400 million in new revenue for the European Union. So now this becomes sort of this holy grail. It's like, I can look good and get votes, and I can get money to fund the things that I want to do without raising taxes and stuff like that. So, and we've become more sensitive to it as some organizations have kind of crossed the line on privacy and stuff like that. You guys have all seen things about social media apps and other things, your cars collecting, information about you that you didn't even realize and stuff like that. You can walk into a shopping area with your phone, never take your phone out of the pocket, and they can identify you with about 70% accuracy today and stuff like that. So without doing anything. So there are things where the industry has sort of crossed the line and people want to focus on that. And so that's become something that everybody needs to do. And then last, but certainly not least, we've got the corporate and government data that's at risk. So there's nothing more exciting, for a hacker to be able to get into a government agency. It's sort of like a badge of honor to be able to do that. But today the market's changed and now they're doing it. It's no longer an intellectual exercise. It's for profit or worse in some cases. We're going to talk about some of the common use cases and why what Microsoft has is starting to pay dividends for some of these things. Okay. So we've got those 3 areas. And what Microsoft said, great, there are 3 places we're going to focus. First of all, we need to understand and govern the data. Okay. Got to find it before we can manage it, right? So then we've got to make sure that we can protect it. And last but not least, we have additional things that we have to do for compliance, things that we have to give to Lisa and team and stuff like that for NARA, for things that, we're supposed to do. The other thing that's a little bit different for federal agencies is we don't get to control all of our things. Most federal agencies actually have other agencies that influence them, just like, commercial firms look at the government as regulators and stuff. So NARA has rules. You could be an agency that's subject to certain Department of Transportation issues. Of course, you've got OPM issues and things like that. So we don't get to control all those things, but we still have to be aware of them and have to make sure that we can manage those. And then fundamental to all of that is you need to be able to do all of these things across the organizational enterprise information. So that includes those third parties, those cloud solutions and stuff, and also things that aren't Microsoft technology. So let me start with how you find the information. And this is where Megan talked about, so the Azure Purview side. So this is not part of your G5 or GCC High license, okay? So this is something that is Azure consumption based. The way it works is it uses Azure to go out and scan other systems, typically third-party cloud repositories, Salesforce, other things. But it can also go against databases, both in-house and external, to be able to find your information. So it can also classify this information, say, hey, that's PII that's stored in this AWS database or something like that. We probably shouldn't have had PII up there. It's good to know about that and stuff like that. So today, Microsoft's, I think, up to almost 300 classifiers out of the box. It's really good about finding this stuff, and it's basically free. So now, it's kind of like the razor blades. So what Microsoft wants is every time you run the search, you give them, a couple pennies and stuff like that. And so it's a terrific tool. So it's an absolutely no-brainer tool to be able to say, let's sit down and use this to build my high-level map of information and see things at least once a quarter, or something like that, get an update of all the information and stuff. So absolutely critical. Where it becomes a little bit tougher is when you want to do it so that you're competing against these systems where you're looking in the systems daily for, information leakage or something like that. That's where it can start to be expensive and you have to do some careful modeling. From the data map, you can then build a data catalog, which is where are all these systems? In your organization, do you know all of the third parties that your users are working with? No. So, and they add things, they're sneaky, they find new things, they collaborate with folks and stuff. So you've got to find these things and be able to build that inventory and also know what additional information is getting in there. With data catalog, you can help maintain that so that you've got a place to start. Really helpful when you've got a FOIA request. Now I know where to go look and things like that. So, and Microsoft has some additional pieces for, this is the other thing, is those MIP labels that I talked about, those tags, you can virtually map those to those systems. So now I've got a database, I've got content that's sitting in AWS. So I'm going to be able to map that. Now, I'm not changing anything that's in AWS or the native application. I'm just making a map of that data, and I can apply that tag. So I can say that this is procurement sensitive information, or this is PII, or whatever I want the tags to be and stuff. And now I can do the same thing for a retention label. So now I can go through and say, oh, that's information, that, matches this NAR record series. This is what I'm supposed to do with it, how long I'm supposed to keep it, what I'm supposed to do. So again, we're not changing anything on the source. It's just a mapping exercise. Now, Microsoft can't go in and do the deletion disposition automatically. What it does do is for all of the regular disposition reports, it generates the reports that say, hey, you need to go look at this and do this and stuff like that. So what we don't want is Microsoft going into third-party applications and automatically deleting things and stuff like that. That's not a good best practice. So, and Microsoft's been real clear. They have a real clear chain of custody for all of those things and how you do those things. And last but not least, you've got data insights where it gives you information. You can build glossaries off the information. You can find other things. You can get insight from the data so you can surface information that you have in those systems that you didn't know about. And again, not part of your M365 license. So now we've got to start dealing with the unstructured content and the content that lives inside our firewall and within M365. And this is where Microsoft Information Protection has really taken the next leap here, I'd say in the last 2 years. Remember I mentioned at the beginning about, users not doing a good job of declaring records and stuff like that? Microsoft doubled down and said, look, we're going to make it so users don't have to do this, not just for records for the most part, but also for this sensitive information types and stuff. So Microsoft has invested heavily in auto classification, and it's dynamic. The users don't have to do anything. It's just automatic. It figures it out. It assigns the labels and stuff. Now, the users can override the labels and they can provide justification that goes in audit logs and stuff like that. The other thing is that you can have your encryption based on the security. So say if it's this, gets this security label, it automatically gets this encryption and stuff for these kinds of things. So the other thing is that now I can use those labels to do other analysis things. So I can use those to determine, is there a security issue? Is there something I should be doing with records? And I can enforce this for Microsoft and non-Microsoft stuff. I can use this to go against Box, for example, and stuff like that. So I can use all of these things that I want to manage and look for the information and go through that because these MIP labels are completely across the platform. One of the really hot modules today is insider risk that is part of your M365 license. Basically, what this lets us do is it lets us look at risky behavior. So let's say I've got, a bad actor that wants to publish things to WikiLeaks or something like that. We all have DLP tools that are supposed to prevent that. The problem with the DLP rules is that we've tended to make them kind of really, really harsh for the users. The user experience is not real good. So we typically limit users from communicating with groups or the outside or something like that. But that's not really right. The real key thing is making it be content specific. I don't care that Fred communicates with a contractor. What I care is if Fred is sending this type of information and sending it to a contractor. That's the kind of thing that I really want to focus on. That we couldn't do in the past. So with the new insider risk tools, especially with the ability to be able to do the tagging, now we can do that. And Microsoft has some other things to make this so that it dynamically changes in real time based on the threats and stuff and what it's seeing and stuff like that. Okay, so let's talk about the data loss prevention technologies traditionally. So let's say that, I'm sitting in HR, I try and email a confidential document. So now the question is, am I doing this in my normal course of business? Do I have a contractor I legitimately need to share information with? Or am I doing it because I'm a disgruntled, employee or contractor and I want to get this information out, or maybe I want to take it to another job or something even worse? Well, traditionally, the DLP rules just knocked off everything. And, that was really tough because then what happened is I needed to make a justification. So then I had to wait till IT made the adjustments in the rules and stuff like that. If I was sitting on the IT side, I, was checking my car to make sure nobody had slashed my tires and stuff because all the users were mad at me. And the result was we dumbed down all of these DLP tools. So we worked with agencies that would spend millions of dollars implementing DLP tools, had great capabilities, and we dumbed them down because it interfered with how the users did work and stuff like that. With MIP, it's a little bit different. Now I can read that MIP label and I can still block Dan from sending the procurement information, but that HR information going to a legitimate source can automatically be allowed and stuff like that. I don't have to do anything special in the system. I don't have to create a new DLP rule to do that. Now, let's say I also accidentally send out some RFP information, about, vendor evaluations or something like that. So I'll tell you, there's a guy with a federal agency named Mike Brown. So Mike Brown, good guy. I have sent him all kinds of the wrong things because I have another customer named Mike Brown. And so I go in Outlook and I start typing, oh, there's Mike Brown. So there it goes. So fortunately, these two guys are very good. So about the inappropriate things that I've sent, for each group and stuff like that. But I had to go and get DLP rules built just so that I could handle this difference and stuff like that. So these kind of things happen all the time. And what we find is that 88% of information leakage is accidental. It's things like someone picking Mike Brown. It's not that people, are inherently trying to do the wrong thing and stuff like that. It just happens in the normal course of business. Well, now, so if I accidentally send this information, it's out there. Now they can forward it, they can sell it, they can do whatever they want and stuff like that, and that becomes a problem. With MIP, I can actually revoke the access. Oops. I can revoke the access. Now, there's some planning that has to go into this, but even though I sent it, so I can make it so that, they can't access it anymore and stuff like that. It automatically includes things like, hey, you can't print this, you can't forward it, you can't even copy it, between applications and things like that. But there are a lot of restrictions that are built in. But the real powerful thing is it allows us to undo, these accidental leakage issues if we can't prevent them to begin with. One of the really neat things that's just come up, and this is not, this is not available in GCC High just yet. There's something called adaptive protection. This is Microsoft leveraging the technology that they've got on the machine learning and the ChatGPT stuff, where, by the way, the stuff that Microsoft has coming out around the ChatGPT technology is breathtaking when it comes to records and information classification. So there's some neat things you're going to see some announcements for shortly. But one of the first things is this adaptive protection, which is says, look, if all of a sudden I see things starting to look differently, like someone all of a sudden, starts downloading a lot of procurement information and they've not downloaded procurement information in ages. So, or, they're in a different location or something like that, where now they're doing some, all of these things contribute to a score that elevates the risk profile. And dynamically, it will adjust the rules for what allows it to go out. And it could be as simple as say, hey, look, we're going to notify the user, hey, this looks like it's sensitive information. Do you want to send it? Yes, here's the justification they have to do. It gets written to the audit log and stuff. Or maybe it goes to a supervisor and says, hey, you've got to approve this before it goes out. Or maybe it just blocks it entirely. The nice thing is, again, we don't have to program all this stuff. It's just built in. We set up sort of the high level rules and it dynamically adjusts based on the environment, the content, the users, and the status. You can even do things like if someone's turned in their notice to leave or something like that, it adjusts the profiles for what they can see and the alert levels and all of that information from there. Okay, so that's how on the safeguard side. Now let's talk about some of the modules for how we're going to put the pieces together. So one of the things that Microsoft has right out of the box, everybody has this today, is they've got something called Compliance Manager. And Compliance Manager is this little dashboard that sort of says where you are. Now, one of the things is it does have, NIST and other rules and ISO rules and stuff like that in there. It does automatic classification. I will just confess, this is something that in an abstract perspective is not real useful because it weights everything equally. And we know not every NIST, regulation is equally important and stuff like that. Some things are more important than others and stuff like that. So, and you can sort of pick and choose what you want. So there's a little customization and stuff. But what it is good for, though, is as you're on a journey for information governance and other things, is it lets you see that you're making progress and stuff. So one of the things that we see a lot of value is that even if I can't use it as an absolute score, so if I got a 61 at one agency, that means nothing for a 61 in another agency. They're not comparable and stuff like that. But within my own agency, if I can see, hey, in fiscal year 22, I was a 58. In fiscal year 23, I'm up to a 74. That shows I'm improving my posture as I move forward and stuff like that. So I want you to aware, this is something that's a good place to start. You can get your folks to log in right now. It runs and collects the information. It is pretty clever for what it does, but I also want you to be clear. You can't compare yourself to other agencies and other organizations because it's not transferable in that way. One of the really hot modules that Microsoft has on the compliance side is something called communications compliance. This is slick. It basically sits and monitors everything that goes through for email, for Teams and stuff like that. You can even find third-party content if you have other things that you deal with and stuff. And so it detects harassing language, bullying, sexual harassment, those kinds of things. One of the other things that it does is it actually looks for source code. One of the real common heart attack vectors is if an outsider could get access to just even a snippet of your source code and stuff like that, that becomes knowledge about how do I break this and trick this so that I can get into the system and hack in. That's more than just stolen user credentials. That's actually getting in fundamentally kind of at a root level and stuff like that. So Microsoft uses the GitHub stuff to say, okay, these are the 20 most popular languages, and it can automatically find that and issue a warning or restrict it as appropriate and stuff like that. You can basically turn on this almost out of the box, and it does some great things. If you have, certain capstone users or something that needs particular surveillance things, there are additional things that you can do to monitor the communications with alerts and stuff like that. And in some cases, it's a good thing. It's like, hey, I'm sending this email. That email is really strong. It, looks like, maybe bullying or something like that. Do you really want to send it? And they can say, yes, I hate this person. I want to send it. And here's the justification why and stuff like that. Or it may be, hey, let's just avoid this. We don't really, this isn't what I really wanted to communicate and stuff like that. So it does a nice job with all of those things. And again, it's part of the license and stuff. So on a G5 license. So, and it's an easy thing to do. Anybody here do FOIA request? So today, the hot thing is to use the Microsoft tools for eDiscovery to be able to go and get the information. There's no chargeback model if you care about that, but for a lot of organizations, the chargeback models have turned out to be, more trouble than they're worth in some cases. So the Microsoft eDiscovery stuff is very good for what you get. So you could go with a Relativity or Xterra or something like that. And I say that as Relativity's largest customer. But the Microsoft stuff does a really, really good job for being able to get information, search, do the legal holds and things like that. One of the things that's different, though, is to understand when you start using this is it enables some new things on the records management side. Traditionally, on the legal hold side, that have documents that need to be held. And what we would do is we would copy all those for legal to work with and stuff like that. With Microsoft, I don't have to do that anymore. And of course, you can see where that causes all kinds of problems. Now it's another source to search. Now it's, another place. I may not have the right version, all of those kinds of things. With Microsoft, we do hold in place. So the document or the email stays exactly where it was in Microsoft, but now it cannot be deleted even by the retention until the hold is released. So it overrides everything. Not even administrator can go in and delete it and stuff like that. It has to be, the hold gets released with the appropriate justification for why they get getting deleted or released. And then when the hold is removed, then the records management policies kick in and apply just normally and stuff like that. So it's really powerful and that it simplifies things, because one of the problems that I traditionally had in working with a bunch of agencies is I wouldn't know necessarily, once they'd release something under a hold, I got to go back and look at it, see what their intention is, or can I just blow it away if it was just strictly a copy and stuff like that. Now all of that goes away. It's just automatic and I don't have to think about it. The other thing is that you end up with document versions and stuff. So with the Purview Data Lifecycle Management, that's Microsoft's terminology for records management. So it does have a few other things and stuff. This is where we start getting into the core things. Now, those of you that have a G3 license only get tagging, okay? You do not get the full records management until you get to a G5 license. So if you're going to stick with G3, you typically are going to have third-party tools that sit and manage the information from there and stuff like that. The other thing is that you get a full disposition process and everything in G5 and stuff like that. But the good news is you can still do all of it. Everything works with tagging. Everything is across the platform. If you send information, somewhere else that supports your retention labels, it all stays with it and stuff like that. So you can also do things like it actually has worm support, where you can have stuff that cannot be ever deleted and stuff like that. It has all the audit logs, the full normal disposition records for NAR ascensioning and stuff like that. So everything is built in there and stuff like that. And again, this is where the automated stuff comes in. The same things that we use to classify the records for security, we can now classify for record series and stuff like that. So again, we want the users involved. There's some inherent things we can set up to inherit information, but the Microsoft auto classification technology can look at the documents and the emails and assign classification, at least in broad categories, so that we can use that to manage it, again, without user intervention. Okay, so on the records management side, sort of the key thing that we have to do if we ever have to go to court, and God forbid any of you have to, get up and testify or something like that, is we need a process that's accurate, reliable, and trustworthy. That's the hallmark and stuff like that. So as long as we're doing it in the normal course of business and we believe it's accurate, we're good. Now, Mark's going to get up a little bit and talk about what we're doing in the DoD side for records management. The old 5015.2 standard is basically dead. So and again, much like Microsoft, I've had a love-hate relationship with 5015.2. So great standard in many ways, but it was so hard to actually get people to implement at the level that it was supposed to. The conceptual things were there, but the technology didn't support some of the pieces and stuff. So the other thing is, how many of you are familiar with modern attachments? So in Microsoft, when you send an email to somebody else in the agency, it doesn't send a copy of the attachment. It actually sends a link back to the original attachment. And when you make a change to the document, that change gets stored in the document. So versioning becomes a little bit of a complex issue. So let me go back to the versioning. So now I've got an issue about, let's say that it's a policy document. So is the retention for the latest document, or is it the version that was at a particular time? So do I have to keep something, for reference purposes and stuff like that? Those are kind of things that you have to think about. And the default is that there are 500 versions of a document that get stored, and you can change that within your environment and stuff like that. So these are the kind of things that come up for e-discovery and records management that you need to know about and stuff like that. The other thing is, if you take a look at sort of the market, so because it's a fragmented market on the records management side, kind of whenever Microsoft does becomes sort of the industry standard. And so if you're doing the same thing that, is done in the prevailing course of business, and it just happens to be Microsoft, that's kind of a good place to start. Now, there are some particular standards, of course, that we need to deal with for the agencies and stuff, but at least you're starting from a place of, where everybody sort of sits there. And ironically, You know, Google and Amazon, the other big tech companies, and certainly Apple and stuff have made very, very little investments in records management and things like that. So Google's the only one that even has something that's sort of rudimentary and stuff like that. So you have to rely on third-party tools all the time and stuff. So talked about the G3 licenses. So the G5 licenses are where you get the what I call real records management, and you get the auto classification. Keep in mind in G3, it's all manual declaration, no auto classification. Okay, and so the other thing is in G3, you don't get file plans and stuff. You get a single retention label. In G5, you get all the fun, fancy stuff. I can apply multiple retention labels to a document so that whatever the one is that is the longest retention, it applies and stuff like that. I can do all of that MIP labeling, all the DLP pieces and stuff like that. I can use all of that. So, and I can do the full records disposition and stuff like that. So I have all the certifications for destruction as well as the things for accessioning to NARA. Okay, so let's talk about one of the things that's new to Microsoft and stuff. So I've got traditional retention and stuff like that, where I say I've got a date for something. This is all, old hat and everything. We do the disposition based on the data that's there. But now what I do if I have a variable date, let's say I have something that, one of the ones that cracks me up is when like GSA gets rid of properties and stuff like that. GSA is, well, the rules are that you have to keep the documents for X many years past the date that you sold the building and stuff like that, not just date of construction or something like that. Well, I don't necessarily know when we sold the building and stuff like that. So, well, I've got to go look it up in a system and stuff. Now, Microsoft has the ability to reach into other systems for event-based retention so that you can dynamically determine how long you have to keep something and go from there. So traditionally, we focus on, we've said that under retention was almost as bad as spoilage, getting rid of information and stuff like that. And it's true, under retention has been an issue. But the interesting thing is that the courts and even, when we have, interagency issues is that it's not been as big a deal as we thought it was going to be in many cases and stuff like that. But if you do have to go to court, the courts assume that the under retention, that you've gotten rid of information that helps the opposing party. That is the default. So it's not that the fines or the issues, dealing with others or the issue. It's that information gets used out of context and you can't defend what you don't have. So that's where the real limitation comes up. And God knows in the political world, poor Mark, if he's got to deal with something that he's worried about is going to be on the front page of the Post and stuff, these are things that it's like, okay, I really want to make sure I've got something to defend things. But here's the problem. The over retention is even worse. So if you accidentally keep things longer, now the courts don't even trust your policies and stuff like that. And there's plenty of case law on this stuff. I had one commercial customer spent over $700 million because they accidentally kept one document. They even had the guy who wrote the document explain to the court that the court was interpreting it wrong. It didn't matter. $700 million, $32 million just in e-discovery costs before they set for it in the courtroom. Again, the courts are looking for that accurate, reliable, and trustworthy and stuff like that. But if you're not consistent in how you apply records management, that says that you don't have an accurate process. It's sometimes I keep stuff, sometimes I don't. So courts don't like that. The other thing is that it creates these out of context threats. And that $700 million example I used, that's exactly the case where it's, I have this, but I didn't have the supporting information because I had applied my retention schedule and gotten rid of some other things that related to it and stuff like that. Those are the kind of things that are a nightmare and stuff because it's hard to disprove what you don't have and stuff like that. So, okay. So as we finish up here, so there's sort of key three groups that everybody has to deal with. We've got the business units, we've got security, and we've got legal. And ironically, they all share certain information. The business units have to collaborate with a variety of folks, both other agencies, other departments, and of course, the contractors and stuff. So maybe the Hill and stuff. So a lot of times they'll use third-party systems for various things. So they may have records in those or other things that we need to manage and stuff. And what they do with the information is what actually determines whether it's a record. Ironically, it's not just because it has this tag on something. The true legal definition of a record comes down to how is it used for information purposes and stuff like that. And the business units are the ones that determine that. So all good things to think about from a compliance records management side. Now I've got the security side. The security side controls everything for how we're going to have access to things and stuff like that. They're the ones, hopefully, that have the inventory of all the systems we have to manage, all of the authorized cloud repositories. Little sketchy. Sometimes we don't always know all the things that, the business units have reached out to and stuff like that, but we try to. And security has the audit logs for what we've done and stuff like that. So fundamentally, they're the ones that are sort of providing the infrastructure along with the rest of IT to do that. And by the way, on legal, I'm using OGC, but the problem is I can't just say OGC because, again, we have legal implications from other agencies and other things and stuff like that. So no OGC controls all of the legal, environment for an agency. It's more complex than, say, a commercial world and stuff like that. But fundamentally, our in-house legal team in the OGC determines the risk profile. I will tell you, I have, sitting confidentially with OGCs and stuff and says, look, I know we've got some risk here, but I really don't think it's a big risk, politically or something like that. I'd hate for there to be an accident or something like that, but I can't spend $5 million to fit, something that I think is going to come up 10 years and be a minor nit on the hill or something like that. Likewise, I had one agency that they spent over $100 million a year to stop $12 million a year in fraud. We all know why we have to do that and stuff like that, but it's tough from a cost justification perspective and stuff like that. So you've got to do these balancing acts, and that's where OGC can help us with those things and stuff. We also have to find out what is it we need downstream to figure things out. And of course, retention ultimately comes down to the OGC for compliance and stuff like that. So here's the thing. All of these groups have information, and it's all related to what? It's related to content. Who knows content? Nobody. And I mean, nobody in the world knows how information flows, what's valuable, what the requirements are, what are the groups that collaborate and stuff like that, like the records managers. So, records management, I can't say has always been the most exciting, technology, most exciting environment. You go to dinner parties and stuff like that, and you talk records management, and now, they walk away and stuff like that. So I get that and stuff. Now, I never thought that we'd get to the point in the career you talk records management and all of a sudden there'd be some political debate, at the same party and stuff like that. So they're asking you questions about this and that and stuff. But the point is, records managers have become increasingly valuable for everybody, not just government agencies, but commercial organizations, because they have this unique information and stuff like that. And so the real key is today, records managers should have a voice in all of the operational decisions. Not that you're trying to add controls and stuff like that, but security gets a whole lot better if they understand the content and stuff like that. So the business operations get a whole lot better if they understand what are the tools that are going to ease their collaboration and be able to manage their downstream processes. And of course, the things for legal and compliance, if records management can play a role, it's going to make life a whole lot easier. So the real key thing is making sure that you understand that records managers need to speak up and go have a voice with, the stakeholders and stuff like that. What you'll find is that, look, there may be a little skepticism about, records management having, something to really add to the table. But once you're able to talk about some of the things that they don't know and how things work together and stuff like that, over and over again, records managers start to become the hero. Yes, ma'am.
My other one.
Yeah.
Question for you.
Good.
So records
Now we
managers.
gotta work at 10.
Hot mic.
So you work at 10:30. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So we got a
Apparently
question in the room real quick. So if you can mute your mic here. We got a question in the room. Yes, ma'am.
So should the records managers be embedded in the business units, or are they outside of these three people?
So traditionally, and it's different for every agency, traditionally you have a records coordinator, which sort of has a dual reporting where they're part of the business unit, but they work with records management to control things. That's typically the inside knowledge. And so collectively they become part of the records management group and stuff like that. But yes, so you're typically finding most of the time they're embedded with the business group, but not always. I know certain agencies where it's completely separate, where it's more their pure line to the records management side. They just happen to be embedded and only work with those records, for that particular group and stuff. So, yep. Okay, so when you take a look at these things, you're going to have things on the data mapping, security side, and compliance side. What I would encourage you is just understand that records management is important. Go get a seat at the middle of all of these things. You're going to have a disproportionate role to move forward with and stuff like that. And particularly with this whole concept that now we're going to manage all of the information, particularly in the Microsoft platform. So there's going to be a lot of value that records managers can provide for that. So with that, thank you very much. I'm going to see you this afternoon. I'm really looking forward to the session. By the way, I've been doing this a long time. the stuff that we've got, for the speakers today is unbelievable. I don't know that I've ever been so excited for a group like this and stuff. So you are really getting some heavy hitters on some things today. So this is going to be fun. So with that, I'm going to turn it over. So, and then, yeah, by the way, take a look. There's some really great comments. I see like Tim's comment about, things for retention in the chat. So I'd encourage all of you to take a look at the chat and keep up with things that are in there and stuff like that. So. Okay, we're going to take a short break. I think we got close to back on time. So everybody will be back here at 10:15 and go back together. So thanks.
Great time again. So if you're like me, you need a morning bio break after coffee. So let's do that. Meet at 10:15. Folks online, 10:15.
I am Amy. I can go there. I didn't know.
I was thinking about being downstairs outside.
Yeah. Well, James. My 2-3-year documents.
Hi, Ali.
Ali, Dan Elam, nice to meet you.
Hi, good to see you. Nice to see you.
Sorry.
I didn't. I saw
That's okay.
I'll be back. Assessment, and then Ali.
We had 100 and.
So the assessment is just a part of the whole database.
But I've been in the record space. Many years.
Good to see you.
I've both done.
Ready to play a new game here. Yeah. So are you coming out or just, okay, yeah, 365, got plenty to learn, but some of the stuff you literally own, but are just not doing.
Yeah. No, I've done some work with things that I think gone well.
Yeah, it's definitely a change for really good for the most part.